What's up guys, Asian here, and this is the fifth and final planned video going over some common misconceptions that I have seen in the ESO community. This particular video will be covering target dummies, also known as trial dummies, parsing, and the kind of misconceptions that center around essentially dummy parsing. So the first thing I want to talk about is not really something that I can show you guys a video on. It's just more of a kind of higher level theoretical concept. A lot of people seem to think that trial dummies are just there for endgame players to basically show off your big dick deeps. And that's part of it. There are people who just like to hit trial dummies in order to get really big numbers. But more than that, a trial dummy is meant to simulate what you would do in an ideal scenario. Basically, the trial dummy gives you several common raid buffs and doesn't hit back. There are no mechanics to deal with. So the idea behind it is that you are basically operating in a closed environment under controlled conditions. Therefore, anything that you do on a trial dummy, any parse that you do, is going to be directly comparable to any other parse that you have done at any other point in time, in that patch of course, on that trial dummy. And it can also be used to compare yourself and your own performance to other players, again, because it is a standardized testing environment. One thing about a standardized testing environment, then, is also the fact that because it's controlled and it's standardized and you don't have to deal with any mechanics, it can be seen as a sort of idealized parse. In other words, if you were operating under the best case scenarios, how good is your rotation? What is the kind of DPS you're able to hit? The trial dummy acts as that sort of controlled environment for parsers and testers to try out different sets, especially during the PTS. The other aspect of the trial dummy involves the fact that it doesn't hit back. There are no mechanics to deal with. And so you're given free reign to practice your rotation. And that really is one of the purposes of parsing. It's really just to practice your rotation and make sure your rotation is at a level where you don't have to think about your rotation when you are actually doing content, and you do have to think about mechanics. One of the big things that you'll find in endgame PvE content is that with the mechanics going on, sometimes you have to think a little bit more about the mechanics than you would about your rotation. And so if you're able to get your rotation down to the point where it's muscle memory, or know your rotation well enough that if you do happen to mess it up because of mechanics or something like that, you're able to very quickly get back to where your rotation should have been, or being able to restart your rotation very quickly. So that's the other aspect of the trial dummy. It gives you an opportunity to practice your rotation to the point where you are very, very comfortable with it. So when you're in an actual environment where you have to deal with mechanics, you don't have to think about two things at once. Instead of focusing on your rotation or focusing on the mechanics, you're able to focus solely on your mechanics and not deal so much with the rotation aspect of it. So there's two sides of a dummy parse. The first one is a controlled environment where you can see how you're improving and kind of stack yourself up against other people. Again, a standardized controlled testing environment. And the other aspect is to practice your rotation to the point where it becomes second nature to you. So in an actual raid, you're able to focus on doing the mechanics properly and sort of have your rotation going on sort of in the background. You're just kind of subconsciously going through your rotation because you know it so well. Another big misconception that I've seen with trial dummies, and this is kind of what I have pulled up here on these multiple tabs here, is the idea that because it is a controlled environment and because that trial dummy doesn't deal with any mechanics, there's this sort of mistake that people think that the trial dummy is not an attainable level of DPS in actual content. To some degree, that is true. For more casual players, for the mid-tier players, for progression groups, it is true. The DPS that you're seeing on a dummy will likely not be the same level of DPS you're seeing in a trial. That's because you're progressing, you're dealing with mechanics, you're learning new strategies, or something along those lines. And that obviously means that you will be doing less damage because you're focusing less on doing a proper rotation. You're focusing more on staying alive and dealing with mechanics. However, in an organized raid group, that is, if you are in a group that does the same trial, once, twice, two nights a week, the level of DPS that you're doing on a dummy is equal to or even lower than what you would see in an actual raid environment. To kind of highlight this is an old video. So this is my Magic DK build back in Herostorm, which was the last patch that I played in. The trial dummy parse that I had for this build video was about 84.7k. On a good day, I can probably parse with the luck of RNG, crit RNG, I could probably get upwards of 85 to 86k. So that would be my trial dummy parse, and for a lot of people, they might mistakenly think that that is a level of DPS that I would not be able to achieve with my main raiding guild, Mayflower. However, people don't realize that the trial dummy, while it does give some very common buffs, it doesn't give every single buff in the game. Out of all the buffs that the trial dummy gives, the one unrealistic buff that it gives is Major Force, which you can see here on this parse is 100% uptime. You're never going to get 100% uptime on Major Force. However, there are other buffs that the trial dummy does not have, and it is actually not reflected. So for example, back in Harrowstorm, Elemental Catalyst was a set that you would run, and so that was not reflected. Zen's Redress is also not reflected on the trial dummy, and there are other sets out there that are also not reflected on the trial dummy either. As a result, even though you're getting 100% Major Force uptime, which is again unrealistic and impossible to get in an actual raid environment, it's missing several other debuffs that more than make up for if you were to adjust for Major Force uptime. Again, Zen's Redress, Elemental Catalyst are the first two that come to mind, just because those were the two sets that were very popular for support roles back in Harrowstorm. So this 84.7k in an organized raid group should be easily achievable. Now the raid group that I ran with, Mayflower, we were not a score pushing guild, we were more of an achievement hunting guild. So we were going for those hard achievements like Godslayer, like Griffin Heart. So we had to optimize to a certain degree in order to achieve get those achievements, because those are very difficult achievements that required high levels of DPS. So I have two parses from our Godslayer runs. These were the highest parses that I got during that patch, but not by much. The other DPS parses were usually within 1k of kind of what you have here. So this is a Lakestes parse back in Harrowstorm. So right now you might see, oh, 43.2. Of course you didn't hit the number that you saw. You didn't hit that 85k. What you have to take into consideration is that this 43.2k is also because we are only in combat for about 49% of the time. So the actual DPS you want is your DPS while active, which you will get if you hover over the active percentage time. So here you can see that my DPS while we were actually fighting was 88.2k. Again, my parse here was 84.7k. So we're a little bit ahead of what my parse is on a trial dummy. And again, that's because we have a lot of different debuffs that are on Lakestes right now. So if we go ahead and take a look at on Lakestes, I think we need to go to enemies, take a look at, oh no, here. I think we have to go to Lakestes. No. Forgetting how to, it's been a while since I've done ESO logs. Oh, this is debuffs. Okay, so these are debuffs out, I believe. No, these are debuffs in. Oh, gain by friendly, cast by friendly. There we go. So you can see here, let's see. Touch of Zen. So you can see we had Touch of Zen up. If you line this up with the uptime, probably, you'll see we have 100% uptime on Touch of Zen. Other debuffs here. I don't see any of the debuffs that, unless it's called something else, we should have also had Elemental Catalyst too, but I don't see it here. It might be under something else. But again, Touch of Zen is one of those debuffs that you don't have on the trial dummy, so it is reflected here, and that's part of the reason why we're getting such a high level of DPS here. Again, we have to go back to Lakestes, 88.2. Here's another parse from a different day, different run, Yolnakreen. Very common, just sort of hit there, stand there and hit it. Again, this DPS is not accurate because you have to take into consideration active uptime, and if we hover over active, my DPS while we were actually hitting the boss was 91.1k. Again, higher than the 84.7k that I parsed on the trial dummy. So again, this is a pretty organized raid group. Mayflower is, again, not a speedrunning guild, so we're not really using optimized strategies, and we're not all the best players in the game. But we did have some level of optimization, we did have some level of coordination, obviously. And so you can see here that I am hitting above what I would be hitting on a trial dummy in an actual environment, in an actual raid environment. And that is reflected currently in current content as well. So this is Skinny Cheek's current build. This is again MagDK, and his parse was 115.1k. Obviously, this is going to vary depending on the level of player. I've seen 110 to 115, upwards of 118k parses from the various videos that I looked up. But Skinny Cheeks was obviously the first one that came to that was the results when I googled ESO MagDK build. And so I went and took a look at a couple of MagDK parses. So this one is from the latest trial, Rock Grove. This is the last boss. This is not even the #1 MagDK parse, I believe, or it might be. I'm not 100%. I don't remember off the top of my head. But again, taking a look at active DPS, 120.5k for the top MagDK parser, 113.2, 109.2. So again, we can't really direct compare these to Skinny Cheeks because obviously every individual parses slightly differently. But if we're using 115k as just sort of like a baseline, 120.5 is higher. 113.2, that can be chalked up to a little bit of RNG, crit RNG, especially when DPS is that high. And then 109.2, that one is probably a little bit lower than what you would expect. This person might be not as good as Skinny Cheeks perhaps, but it's still reasonable. It's a reasonable parse given the trial dummy parse that Skinny Cheeks had. Looking again at Yolnakreen, the classic trial dummy. This MagDK hit 146.5k. This MagDK hit 130.7k. This MagDK hit 127.0k. And I bet you this MagDK might have been the debuff bitch. So let's go ahead and take a look here at their summary. Yeah, and this MagDK was in Zen. So that Skinny Cheeks parse was in the full, DPS setup. This is the debuff MagDK. So this is the Zen's DK. And they still managed to get a pretty decent parse. A really good parse here on Yolnakreen. Again, 127k. So the dummy, while it is a very good representation of your trial parse, or what you would see in a raid for probably progression groups or organized progression groups, I should say. If you're in a group that is organized, that is coordinated, that has run this content several times, so it's not a progression group, your dummy parse will likely be lower or equal to what you would actually see in a raid group. But those are sort of the big misconceptions that I kind of wanted to clear up with trial dummies. With this video, this concludes basically all the planned videos for clearing up any common misconceptions. If you guys have anything else you would like me to cover in ESO, I'll see whether or not I still have the knowledge to kind of cover it accurately. And if so, I might make a video. But other than that, this is probably going to be one of my last few videos on ESO. I will be pushing out a few videos on Final Fantasy XIV, and I might revisit ESO at a later date if there is a high enough demand and there are questions that I feel like I can answer on ESO. But that is it for this video. Hope you guys learned something, and I'll see you guys later.